how did you find the time to do all this stuff? Like, because you haven't done real estate in a little while, and a lot of
Sure.
times we hear this, hey, let's I don't have the time for this kind of stuff. Like, how did you find the time to do it? How much time did you spend working on this in this thing?
Yeah, I'm a big believer. I've loved the book. One of my favorite reads is the book Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my approach to multifamily has been to just break things up into small chunks and, keep it simple, right? Just, I get up, I'm an early riser, I get up sometimes at 4:30 in the morning, I have my coffee and, work out. And then I've got that time where, it's all mine, right? I can do with that time whatever I want. And so I dedicated the first 2 hours of each day before things got kind of crazy and carried away. A lot of nighttime. I cut out social media and TV for a
Mm.
while. When I started analyzing how I'm spending my day. Right, there's a lot of stuff that I think we do that we think is productive. So through that process of just streamlining, I freed up, lots of blocks of time in the morning, in the evening, and on the weekends. And the modules are very straightforward. There's a lot of content, right? But it's very efficiently done. And, it doesn't take that much to get through. And, they're designed to get you up and running and taking action right away.
Yeah, atomic habits, it's really not a time management problem. And same thing getting to multifamily, anything meaningful in life, it's really a priority problem. How did you make this a priority? In other words, why was this a priority? Did you maybe talk to, I don't know, your family about this? Like, why did you make it such a priority? Why did you make all these changes to your life to make room for this?
I think coming back to the pain of my past experience, one of the resonating thoughts that kept returning to me, Michael, is that if I know I'm in a place where some things have happened, right? And I realize there's an opportunity to take those experiences, as painful as they've been, and transform that into something more beneficial for myself, right? To give me some fulfillment through that learning process, but also to, more than anything for me, to create a legacy uh, for my family to kind of build that and maybe share that, even maybe teach my son at some point how to do what I'm doing as I succeed, and then give back, through all that as part of the bigger picture, to give back to community and, kind of complete the loop there, right? Through that transformation process.
I want to talk about your deal, but we always talk about the actual outcome. What we don't really recognize is the steps that we take to get to that outcome, but also maybe the small wins along the way. Can you talk a little bit about the whole process and maybe some of the small wins and milestones that you achieved on the way to that deal, which we're going to get to in a second?
One of the things that jumped out from the teaching was the relationship with brokers. When I first started getting into, the process of, let's get this rolling with activity, and some of the teaching that's in the course about, there's that reaching out, right, for that initial contact, but then there's this, how do you keep that relationship going with the broker? And what I learned through some of that was that it's a very enjoyable process, right? I mean, to just initiate that relationship and kind of be able to follow up and provide value, and asking questions, and realizing one of the successful points that I learned was that um, it's a win-win situation, right? There are ways I can add value through the process of building that relationship. So I've got a lot of pretty good connections that turn out to be brokers. And if I compare that to what I was doing before I got help and was educated, where I'm kind of reaching out and what's in it for me, right? Probably much more of a self-centered approach to finding property. And then now I've kind of come full circle, I would say, during the process of learning how it's those little things, right, of how to communicate, how to follow up, how to ask the right questions, that kind of has allowed me to maybe separate myself in some ways from some of the other people that they're probably taking calls from every day. So I'd call that a kind of that learning of the more of the relationship process and how it works, a pretty small and significant success.
And developing confidence to talk to brokers, right? And in your case, also investors. Now, we typically talk about, I mean, normally when you go through our program, you're going to learn the fundamentals of apartments from A to Z, everything. But you kind of pick a career track, right? There's going to be more the deal finder career track and more of the capital raiser career track, typically from the way you are, your personality is, like just the way you are. And did you find yourself resisting certain activity or gravitating towards one or the other, capital raiser or deal finder?
Sure, it's interesting that coming into the course, is totally focused on finding a property, being the lead GP on that property. I had several offers that I had made. They were pretty good offers and were getting pretty close to possible acceptance. And if I'm being honest with myself, I had actual dread in many cases that the offers were going to be accepted.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I had all the fear was because I knew deep down that if the offer was accepted, I'd done nothing to prepare myself for the capital side. I really had very little knowledge. I hadn't reached out and built a network, hadn't had any conversations with other people. And, I've talked to others who've shared that same common fear. So fortunately for me, I think there came a point where I realized there was a distinction, right? The capital raiser and the person who's doing the due diligence or maybe spending time analyzing deals, we're not always the same people, right? They may be part of that team. So I actually had a interesting conversation with a Marcus and Millichap broker back in June of last year. And he said, hey, I know we're looking at all these properties, but have you ever considered the possibility of being coming in as a limited partner on a larger deal? And I said, well, not really, but what are you talking about? So he sent me the prospectus. I took a look at the property, went out and drove it, studied the financials, talked to my coach, and then, next thing you know, I'm a limited partner on this 128 unit Class B building in Kokomo, Indiana, about 25 miles north of Indianapolis. And I thought, well, that's not exactly how I thought I'd come into the program or where I would evolve on the way to a possible deal. But that's just kind of the way we started.
And then, so now we're talking about the first deal. So you kind of got into it a little bit, but then what happened? Because you obviously ended up with, so what happened? Yeah.
So of course I ended up, got a Zoom call arranged with the lead GP, who was Chad, who, I did a little digging around on Chad, and I realized, oh, he's a former Michael Blanc student. I watched one of his interviews that she did with him probably 2 or 3 years back. And I thought, okay, check that box. That's a good thing. Had my one-on-one with Chad, and did the limited partnership. And then about 3 or 4 days later, he calls me into his office and he said, I've raised a lot of money for this deal, but he said, I'm running this company. We seem to have some shared interests here. I think I could see you raising capital for me. Have you ever thought about that? And I said, well, yeah, a little bit. And he said, well, how much money do you think you could raise? And I said, I don't know. How much money do you think I could raise? And he said, well, could you raise $300,000 in 30 days? I said, I don't know. Let's give it a shot. So, I went out, I talked to my first friend, and he said, all right, I'll give you $200,000. And I thought, wow, this thing's pretty easy. I just got to go out and, have a couple of cups of coffee, whatever. So yeah, that was the first encounter that I had. And then I went almost 30 days from there before I had another investment.
Beginner's luck. But so yes. you ended up raising what, about $800,000?
Yeah. So we started it, we got the 300 in 30 days. And then he said, well, let's see what you can do between now and the end of the year. So I ended up raising a total of 800,000 in about 4 months.
All right. So you had focused more on the deal finding and not so much on the capital raising, but you obviously learned about the capital raising in the course and all that stuff. So you kind of know what you're talking about. But talk about the activity. What was it? What did you do to raise money? What did your cadence look like? What did you do every single day, every single week?
Yeah, that's great. So I just went pretty old school. I just got my Excel spreadsheet out. I opened up my iPhone. I just poured every possible contact that I could into there. And someone along the way had suggested, don't try to screen these people. Don't try to look at each name and say, oh, this person will definitely invest. This person won't. Just don't prejudge it. So I put everybody in there. And getting back to the Atomic Habits philosophy, I decided, my goal is to meet 3 to 5 people per week for a cup of coffee. And I thought that's doable, right? And if I do that, every week for 2 to 3 months, that's a lot of presentations. So really just started picking up the phone. My approach was, hey, I've got something really exciting in the multifamily space that I've gotten involved in recently. I'd really love to get your feedback on this. And it's been a while since we've caught up together. Obviously, if you know somebody after you've seen this information who could possibly have an interest, I'd love to have you introduce me to them and we could kind of keep that conversation going. But what would you think to just getting together, next Wednesday at 8:30 for some coffee? And surprisingly, I had a really high success with that. I'd say 75% of the time, I was able to get to get that meeting, to make that happen. I think it really took the pressure off by just kind of approaching it that way versus, hey, I need $100,000. You're the first person that came to mind. Let's sit down and find out if you want to do this deal, right? Definitely not. I don't think that would have been the best approach to take getting started.
Yeah, so we have this deal tracker, as you probably already know, where we track these activities like brokers, deals, and also on the capital side. So you're doing exactly that, which is you create a spreadsheet, my favorite thing, and you had goals. I need 3 to 5 meetings a week, which means you have to contact probably 10 to 15 people, email them, text them, call them, set these meetings up, and now you're getting reps, right? The first one, maybe, well, you got lucky in the first one because a buddy of yours would give you $200,000 without you trying much because he likes you. Yeah. Right. But then in the beginning, it was probably a little awkward to have conversations. How did the conversations go by the 10th time you had an investor meeting? How was that 10th conversation different than the first?
Yeah, so much much less fear, right? I think that's that getting started, and again, getting back to that initial fear, right? I've got to take some action here. It's possible they could say no, or whatever the worst possible scenario I could possibly imagine might be, right? And then talking that through, I think there's one thing to have it in your head, right? Like, I know what this information is, but then when you're face to face with somebody, and you're presenting that for the first time, the second time, even the 10th time, right? Realizing that everybody's different. The second guy I talked to, it's a 32-page prospectus. We went through the entire 32-page prospectus. I mean, he wanted he probably had 50 questions. I mean, he blew me out of the water. I think I had to go home and take a nap for a half hour after that conversation, and then there were others where, we'd open maybe one page in an hour and a half of, he just wanted to, see if he trusted me, right? It was more about the relationship with that person. So I think that was part of the learning. I know you mentioned that before, learning how to raise capital, right? There's no substitute for going out there, having those conversations and realizing there are lots of different personalities. Everybody's needs are different, their timing's different. And so getting a better feel for how to read people by the 10th time versus being scared about, more focused on myself again, right? How am I going to get this across? What am I going to say? What does he think of me, right? A lot of change from that first time, moving down along the continuum of conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's just amazing what repetition does in Atomic Habits. Repetition, practice makes perfect, and that's a great way to do that.